different social engineering attack models, and I guess for people who are interested in this area, you may see some of these, have looked at various aspects of social engineering attacks. And what we thought when we looked through these models is really we wanted a comprehensive model. The reason to model something is generally that something in real life is quite complex, quite detailed, and what you want is a model that's simple but can kind of encompass all different aspects of a situation. So some focus on attack actors, looking at humans and policies and technologies. Others consider that you will do a certain element of information gathering at the start of an attack. Some look at detecting an attack whilst it's in progress, and that might be where you're raising awareness. Can somebody actually detect an attack as it's happening? Some do it by looking at appropriate countermeasures. But a number looked at staged attack models. And I guess perhaps the most obvious of the staged technical attack models is the kill chain. And perhaps this is something that people have come across. Yeah, I'm looking stuff for some reassurance here, as I'm yeah, which looks at a number of steps in an attack, right from reconnaissance at the start, where you're gathering information about an individual, to the end case when you're delivering the attack, deploying the attack and getting the information you need. Actually, interestingly, once you start looking at a social engineering attack, you see gaps in process and systems all the time. It would be quite easy in this hotel, and I'm saying it in these 4 walls, to get access to anybody's room. We didn't, but we could have done. When we looked at the process, if you go to reset your key, you don't have to do anything, you just reset your key, you can get access anywhere you want. And we might mention that on our way out. So once you start looking at this, it becomes incredibly interesting. We thought there was a need for a holistic model, one that would allow for unpredictable human behaviour, that considers risk to the attacker, but also risk to the individual and the organisation involved in this attack. That looked at reconnaissance not just at the start of an attack, where you're information gathering, but the idea that reconnaissance would take place all the way through the attack. We also wanted to consider where we wanted to place countermeasures. Okay, so when you look at countermeasures, and I know one of our keynote speakers, Andrea, alluded to this earlier on, if you've got an attack, an email attack, the quicker you can stop it, the less work is involved. So people are picking up attacks quite quickly, they're not progressing, they're not causing much more of a problem. So where do you place the countermeasures? And what aspect of the attack are they trying to stop? And one that considered attacks that are becoming ever more sophisticated. And this is our initial model. Now what this model looks at is, as the attack becomes more complex, as we look to the right, the risks get higher. That we are looking at reconnaissance throughout the attack process and risk, that generally there's a trigger event of some description that will trigger somebody into conducting this type of attack. And that once the attack's through, it will iterate through these phases time and time again. And with a view to kind of developing this model is, where do you place the countermeasures to be the most effective, and how do you look at an early intervention? Can you disrupt this process as early as possible? Just kind of a point of note is some of the other research we're doing is with West Yorkshire Police, looking at how people become radicalised online. And that looks very much from the point of view of the victim. This is from the point of view of the attacker. And how do you place early interruption interventions in a process that means you're going to halt it? Generally, you don't find out somebody's radicalised until they've started to travel. How can we look at the process ahead? And we do that looking at technical and non-technical aspects of that process. So, in terms of preventative countermeasures, we looked at policy development and HR processes in terms of how you hire hire somebody. Process and procedures for information disclosure. What kind of information are employees disclosing at large, and can you have policies and procedures against that? We also looked at how you could perhaps continuously monitor process changes. If you can make minor alterations to processes, it doesn't give an attacker much chance to learn what that process looks like. So you can interrupt it that way. And looking at separation and rotation of different duties. So you're not expecting the same person to be able to give that information all the time. They will have rotated around. When you look at detective and corrective countermeasures, looking at particularly awareness raising, can somebody detect an attack whilst it's in motion? Physical security, particularly looking at additional policy development and training for incident response. And we had a discussion around, when does an incident become an incident? Is an incident at the trigger point, or is it when the actual attack's deployed? So when do you respond to that incident? So, some conclusions. We want to get a better understanding, I think we've already got there to some extent, but we want to continue to get an understanding of the software engineering attack process. We've looked really at how you can model attacks from the very complex to the very simple, from ones that are staged over a period of weeks and months to ones that are kind of quite spontaneous. We now want to look at how to develop new and effective countermeasures and interventions at early stages, and how you disrupt that attack before it becomes a real problem. And also, what about the insider attack? As we all know, that's a huge issue. How do we model that, and how do we incorporate that into this kind of scenario? And how do we develop the victim as part of the solution? That's it.
Thank you.